I am Joshua, 34 years old, and my own mother just left a voicemail telling me I was cut off from the family forever. Before I tell you how their entire fake empire collapsed in just 48 hours, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. It was exactly 6:12 p.m. on a rainy Thursday evening. I was standing in a sterile, fluorescent-lit service corridor of a massive private hospital downtown. I work as a forensic compliance officer. My entire career is built around tracking down where money is supposed to go, finding out where it actually went, and holding people accountable when those two things do not match. I was leaning against a cold cinder block wall, a half-empty cup of terrible, stale cafeteria coffee in my hand, staring out the rain-streaked window at the gray parking lot below. My badge felt heavy around my neck. It had been a grueling 14-hour audit. Then, my phone vibrated in my pocket. A single new voicemail notification popped up on the screen. It was my mother. I pressed play, expecting the usual demand to fix a broken contract or handle a bill they forgot to pay. Instead, the audio crackled slightly, and her voice came through. It was not angry. It was not unhinged. It was much worse. It was that polished, ice-cold, overly enunciated tone she usually saved for retail workers, waiters, and anyone else she considered entirely beneath her. "Joshua," she said. There was no greeting, no warmth. "You're cut off. Do not contact us again. We are moving forward without you." Click. She hung up. Just like that. She delivered a verdict and walked away. A janitor pushed a heavy medication cart past me, the wheels squeaking rhythmically on the linoleum floor, completely unaware that my family had just officially thrown me in the trash. I did not cry. My chest did not heave with sorrow. I did not immediately try to call her back to beg for forgiveness. I just stood there, letting the cold seep into my back from the wall. I replayed the message a second time, then a third. I needed to hear the sheer contempt in her voice clearly. I needed to hear it to kill the last pathetic, hopeful part of me that thought they might actually love me for who I was, rather than what my bank account could do for them. For over a decade, I was the human shield for my family. I was the guy who fixed their emergencies, signed their guarantor forms, navigated their legal messes, and made their chaotic financial lives look respectable to the outside world. The very second I asked a single uncomfortable question about their spending, the second I stopped being a convenient, silent ATM, I became entirely disposable. I pulled my phone away from my ear. I opened our text thread. I stared at the blinking cursor for a long moment. I did not ask why. I did not write a paragraph defending myself. I typed a single word and hit send. Okay. My mother thought she was discarding a disappointment. She thought she was establishing dominance. What she did not realize, in her incredible arrogance, was that she had just severed ties with the one person holding the structural beams of her fantasy life together. You see, my parents were right in the middle of a massive luxury downsizing move. They were selling our old childhood home and buying a high-end, gated townhouse by the lake. They had been bragging to their friends at the country club about this fresh chapter for 6 months. What they conveniently left out of their wealthy socialite stories was that the only reason their bridge loan existed was because I had agreed, against my better judgment, to oversee the legal access chain. I was maintaining the shared authorization over 2 linked accounts to confirm the source of funds for the title company. Without my pristine credit, my salary verification, and my legal indemnification, their massive real estate deal was nothing but hot air. If they were cutting me off, I was cutting the cord. I walked over to a nearby waiting room bench, sat down, and opened my work laptop. I connected to the secure hospital Wi-Fi. I logged into the private banking portal. 2-factor authentication pinged my phone. I typed in the 6-digit code. My eyes scanned the screen until I found the shared authorization tab. My mouse hovered over the red button that read, "Revoke all permissions." I didn't hesitate. I clicked it. The screen refreshed. Access locked. The bridge funds were instantly frozen. Next, I opened my email client. I drafted a very short, highly professional message to the title coordinator handling their new townhouse. I informed her that I was no longer serving as the verification contact for the source documentation package, effective immediately, and that any documents bearing my digital signature were officially voided. Then, I emailed the real estate broker, officially revoking my authorization to communicate on the transaction. Finally, I sent a note to my parents' accountant, explicitly stating that my review chain and indemnification language were no longer attached to any of their financial filings. I closed my laptop. The entire process took exactly 14 minutes. No screaming, no dramatic social media posts, no revenge speech. Just a series of lawful, clinical withdrawals from systems that only functioned because my name was on them. I drove home, ordered a large pepperoni pizza, and slept a full, uninterrupted 8 hours for the first time in months. By 8 a.m. the next morning, the first crack in their perfect future split wide open. The townhouse closing was officially halted because the seller's side refused to proceed without the verified documentation I had just pulled. By noon, the restoration contractor at the old house stopped packing boxes because the deposit confirmation bounced hard. Then came the silence. A heavy, anxious, calculating silence from my family. They were figuring it out. The paperwork had stopped moving. 2 days later, the dam broke. I woke up, poured myself a cup of black coffee, looked at my phone, and saw the notifications stacked up on my lock screen like a slot machine paying out. 58 missed calls. Not 5, not 8, 58. My father left 3 voicemails before lunch. Joshua, there has been a massive misunderstanding. Please call me back right now. His voice shook with a pathetic kind of panic. The family group chat, which had been silent for weeks, was suddenly a war zone of incoming texts. But the message that actually made me smile came at 8:17 p.m. from an unknown number. It was Carter, their expensive, aggressive real estate lawyer. Joshua, this is Carter. We have a serious problem. The transaction is completely frozen. Call me tonight. I stared at the text. A serious problem. Those words hit entirely different when they come from a man who bills $500 an hour. I typed my reply slowly, savoring every single keystroke. Enjoy moving forward. You said that first. Psych. I tossed the phone onto my couch. I knew exactly what was about to happen next, but to understand why I let them burn to the ground, you have to understand the fire they started 20 years ago. I did not wake up one morning and decide to be a wall of solid ice toward my own blood. They built that wall, brick by exhausting brick, over 2 decades. When I was 18 years old, I got my acceptance letter to a solid, respectable state university. I had worked nights and weekends at a greasy local diner for 2 years, smelling like old fries and bleach, saving every single dime I could into a joint account I shared with my dad. That was my college fund. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, ripping open the envelope, feeling like I finally had a ticket out of the suffocating pressure of my house. I drove to the bank the very next day to transfer the money to my own independent student account. I handed my ID to the teller. She looked at her screen, frowned, clicked her mouse a few times, and then refused to meet my eyes. I'm sorry, Joshua, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. That account has an available balance of $42. I drove home so fast my hands were completely numb gripping the steering wheel. I found my dad in the garage, calmly polishing his expensive golf clubs. I demanded to know where my money went. He did not even have the decency to look ashamed or apologize. He just sighed, rubbed the back of his neck, and looked at me like I was being an inconvenience. The hardware store took a major hit this quarter, Josh. I had to cover the payroll somehow. It is family money. We all make sacrifices. You can take out student loans just like everyone else. He stole my future to cover his own bad business decisions, and he had the nerve to call it a sacrifice. Meanwhile, my younger brother, Elijah, was the undisputed golden child. Elijah never had a college fund because Elijah never intended to go to college, and my parents never pushed him. Elijah wanted to be an entrepreneur. When Elijah turned 19, my parents co-signed a massive loan for a brand new lifted truck he absolutely did not need. When he totaled it 6 months later by running a red light, my mother cried, hugged him, and blamed the other driver, even though the police report clearly stated Elijah was texting. I put myself through school entirely on my own. I juggled heavy student loans and 3 part-time jobs. I slept 4 hours a night. I graduated at the top of my class, got my credentials, and started grinding my way up the corporate ladder in forensic compliance. When I was 26, I landed a massive promotion. I was finally making a real, substantial salary. I bought myself a decent watch, took myself out to a steakhouse alone, and thought my life was finally, truly mine. 2 weeks later, Elijah showed up at my apartment building. He did not knock. He just stood in the hallway looking like a kicked puppy. He had completely maxed out 3 high-interest credit cards trying to start a luxury dropshipping business that spectacularly failed. Debt collectors were calling my parents' house at all hours. "Mom said you got a big promotion," Elijah mumbled, staring at my shoes, refusing to make eye contact. "She said you could help me out. Just a loan, bro. I swear." I said no. I told him to grow up and get a job. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. My mother spent an entire hour screaming at me through the receiver. She called me selfish. She said I was destroying the family over a few $1,000s. She cried, a high, piercing, theatrical sound that made my stomach turn into knots. "He is your brother," she wailed. "You have so much, and you cannot even help your own blood? What is wrong with you? We gave you everything. I paid it. I transferred the money, wiped out half of my hard-earned savings, and paid off Elijah's debt. I told myself it was the absolute last time. But it was not. It became a deeply ingrained, toxic system. Every single time my parents wanted to buy something they could not afford, or every time Elijah ruined his credit score, they looked at me. I was the responsible one. I was the boring guy with the steady salary and the excellent credit score. I was expected to forfeit my peace for their chaos. A few years ago, I was having a beer with Nathan, a guy I had known since high school. Our families were relatively close. I vented to him about how my parents had just aggressively guilt-tripped me into co-signing a luxury apartment lease for Elijah because his credit was so trashed no landlord would look at him. Nathan took a slow sip of his beer and shrugged indifferently. "It's family, man. You only get one. You have to take care of them. You make good money. Why are you stressing about it?" I stared at him, realizing in that exact moment that nobody on the outside saw the trap I was caught in. They just saw a guy who had his life together complaining about helping his poor, struggling family. They did not see the exhaustion. They did not see the sheer, unapologetic entitlement. They did not see the emotional blackmail. Over time, I became the one who reviewed the complex contracts my parents refused to read. I corrected the tax exposure they ignored. I structured payment plans they could not sustain. I translated the harsh, unforgiving consequences of the real world into soft language they could comfortably ignore. My mother never respected my career. She thought accounting and compliance were incredibly boring and beneath her social circles. But she absolutely loved the insulation my career could provide for her. So, when they decided to sell the family home and buy a luxury lakefront townhouse they could barely afford, it was completely natural for them to demand I handle the bridge loans, the legal access chains, and the escrow accounts. It was natural for them to use my pristine financial reputation to back their vanity project. They viewed my money and my name as their unofficial inheritance. They expected my blind loyalty, but they forgot that loyalty goes 2 ways. And my mother's voicemails had just burned the bridge to the ground. 48 hours after I pulled my authorization, the shockwaves hit them. And they hit with the force of a freight train. My phone was a vibrating, ringing nightmare. 58 missed calls. The family group chat, which had been blissfully silent for weeks, was suddenly a war zone of panicked, accusatory texts. My uncle Luke called next. Luke was my dad's brother. A guy who always played the wise peacemaker but really just wanted everyone to stay quiet, so he didn't have to deal with any uncomfortable drama. I let it go to voicemail. "Joshua," Luke's voice filtered through the speaker a minute later. "Your dad is having severe chest pains over this. You need to stop throwing a tantrum and call the broker immediately. You are being completely unreasonable and hurting your mother. Call me. Tantrum. That was what they called a 34-year-old man executing a legal withdrawal to protect his own livelihood. Then came Ryan, the slick real estate agent handling the townhouse purchase. He texted me 4 times in 10 minutes. "Josh, the sellers are threatening to walk. We need your signature on the verification forms by 3 p.m. today or they keep the earnest money. Please call me. This is serious." I blocked Ryan's number. I had already informed his office in writing. I was not his client anymore. My liability was 0. But the call that actually made the blood in my veins run cold came from a number I did not immediately recognize. I answered it only because the caller ID showed it was local. "Hello, is this Joshua?" A calm, highly professional voice asked. "This is Samuel, the resident liaison at Oakwood Estates." Oakwood Estates was the ultra-premium nursing home my mother had been touring for my grandmother. My grandmother was sweet, suffering from early-stage dementia, and entirely dependent on my parents for custody and care. My mother had been showing off glossy brochures of Oakwood to her country club friends for weeks, bragging about the indoor hydrotherapy pool, the private chefs, and how only the best was acceptable for her mother. "Yes, this is Joshua," I said, my grip tightening on the phone. "I am calling regarding your grandmother's custody and care agreement," Samuel said carefully, choosing his words with practiced neutrality. "We received an automated notification that your financial guarantor status has been revoked. I need to inform you that without your verified backing, the family does not meet the basic income requirements for the suite they reserved. Your mother assured us the deposit was fully secured by your accounts." My jaw clenched so hard my teeth actually ached. A thick, hot wave of anger rushed into my face. My mother had not just used my name for the townhouse. She had actively used my financial backing to secure a luxury suite for my grandmother. A suite she absolutely could not afford on her own, just so she could look like a wealthy, devoted daughter to her superficial friends. "Samuel," I said, keeping my voice dead level. "My mother does not have access to my accounts. If she represented that she did, she lied to you. I am no longer involved in their financial structuring in any capacity." There was a heavy, awkward pause on the other end of the line. "I understand, Joshua. Thank you for the clarification. We will have to inform the family that the reservation is canceled." He hung up. I sat in my living room, the silence pressing against my ears. This wasn't just about a townhouse anymore. They were gambling with my grandmother's physical living situation. I opened my laptop. Even though I had revoked their access to my accounts, I still had read-only access to the joint emergency fund I shared with my father, the one I had forced him to set up years ago specifically for my grandmother's medical care and potential funeral expenses down the line. I had not looked at it in 2 months, trusting him to manage it. I logged in. The balance was supposed to be $40,000. The screen loaded. The balance was $1,200. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pulled up the transaction history. Over the past 6 weeks, there had been a series of massive withdrawals. $5,000 here, $8,000 there. The descriptions were vague. Transfer to E. Checking. E. Elijah. I dug deeper. I pulled the routing numbers and cross-referenced the vendor IDs. Elijah had completely drained my grandmother's emergency medical fund. And what did he use it for? A high-end luxury car rental agency, a boutique jeweler, a beachfront resort down in Miami. Elijah had drained an old woman's medical fund to rent a Porsche 911 and take his new girlfriend on a luxury vacation, acting like the joint account was his personal slush fund, and my parents let him do it. No, worse, my parents absolutely knew he did it, and their grand plan was to use the sale of the old house to quietly cover it up, using my bridge loan to float the townhouse purchase in the meantime. They were playing a massive, illegal shell game, and when the bridge loan required my strict verification, my mother panicked. Instead of telling me the truth, she tried to bully me into signing the papers blindly. And when I asked questions last week, she left me that voicemail cutting me off, assuming I would cave under the threat of abandonment like I always did. They were not just financially illiterate. They were dangerously toxic. I closed the laptop. My hands were shaking, not from sadness, but from pure, unadulterated rage. I was entirely done playing defense. It was time to go on the offensive. The very next morning, I sat in a heavy leather chair across from Matthew, my therapist. Matthew was a sharp, perceptive guy in his 50s who did not believe in sugarcoating anything. I had been seeing him for 6 months, mostly complaining about work burnout and chronic fatigue. I laid the entire ugly situation out for him. The voicemail, the revoked access, the drained account, the rented Porsche, the nursing home lie. Matthew steepled his fingers and looked at me intensely. Joshua, how do you feel right now in your body? I feel like I am watching a massive train crash in slow motion, I said, rubbing my temples. And my whole family is on the train, screaming at me to fix the tracks while they are actively driving it off the cliff. They are bleeding you dry, Matthew said bluntly. Financially, emotionally, psychologically. Your mother's voicemail was not a rejection. It was a calculated negotiation tactic. She cut you off because she expected you to panic, internalize the guilt, and come crawling back, eager to prove your worth by fixing their mess. I didn't, I said. No, you didn't. Matthew smiled slightly. You established a firm boundary, and toxic systems violently reject boundaries. The question is, what are you going to do now? I don't know, I admitted. Stay quiet? Let them ruin themselves? Change my number? Matthew leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. Silence protects the abuser, Joshua. They have spent your entire life controlling the narrative. They stole your college fund and called it a sacrifice. They enabled Elijah and called it love. If you stay quiet now, your mother will spin this. She will make you the villain to everyone she knows. You need to protect yourself with undeniable facts. I left his office feeling a strange, cold clarity washing over me. I drove home and immediately started building a physical binder. I am a compliance officer. Documentation is my religion. I printed everything. The time-stamped voicemail transcription, the emails to the title company and the broker, the message from the real estate lawyer Carter, the bank statements showing Elijah's withdrawals to the luxury car rental agency. I put everything into clear plastic sleeves, organizing them chronologically. I was sitting on my living room floor, surrounded by paper, when my laptop chimed loudly with a new email notification. It was a forward from a woman named Sarah. Sarah was a former corporate client of mine who sat on the board of a prominent, highly respected local elder care charity. My mother was also on that committee. She absolutely loved the social prestige of rubbing elbows with the local elite. Sarah's note at the top just said, "Thought you should see this. I am so sorry, Joshua. Let me know if you need anything." I opened the attached PDF. It was an elegant, gold-embossed invitation to an exclusive, high-ticket charity gala. The host? My mother, Patricia. The venue? The historic conservatory downtown. But it was the event description printed on the second page that made my blood pressure spike dangerously high. Join Patricia in an evening of profound giving. As a devoted mother and caregiver, Patricia understands the heavy burden of elder care. She has recently taken on full responsibility for her aging mother's transition, navigating this difficult time alone after her eldest son tragically chose resentment over family responsibility, abandoning his financial obligations. I read it 3 times. The words blurred together. She was using me. She was actively using my lawful withdrawal as a sob story to extract donations from wealthy socialites. She was playing the brave martyr, painting me as a selfish monster, and using fake money. Money she did not have because the townhouse deal was dead, to pledge sponsorships to this charity. She was building a public monument to her own ego on top of my ruined reputation. I looked at the date on the invitation. The gala was tonight. I did not scream. I did not throw my phone at the wall. I walked into my bedroom, opened my closet, and pulled out my absolute best tailored, charcoal gray suit. I meticulously ironed my crisp white shirt. I polished my leather shoes until they looked like black glass. I took a long shower, letting the scalding hot water run over my back. I felt completely detached. The scared, guilty son who always wanted to please his mother was dead. He died the exact moment he heard that voicemail. The man putting on the suit was a forensic auditor who had just uncovered the ultimate fraud. I picked up the binder of evidence, slid it into a sleek, hard-shell leather briefcase, and grabbed my car keys. I was not going to let them control the narrative anymore. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. I was going to show up to the party. The downtown conservatory was a massive, breathtaking dome of glass and steel, filled with exotic winter greenery, blooming orchids, and soft, glowing string lights. It smelled like expensive perfume, roasted prime rib, and old money. Waiters in crisp white shirts circulated effortlessly, carrying silver trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. I walked past the coat check, my leather briefcase heavy and solid in my right hand. Nobody stopped me. I was dressed perfectly for the room. I belonged there just as much as anyone else. I stood near the edge of a massive indoor stone fountain and scanned the crowded room. It did not take long to spot them. My mother was holding court near the center of the room, wearing a stunning, clearly expensive navy evening gown. My father stood slightly behind her, holding a glass of scotch, looking nervously around the room. Elijah was there too, wearing a velvet dinner jacket, laughing loudly with a group of young women, acting like a billionaire playboy instead of a broke kid driving a rented Porsche. I started walking toward them, my footsteps steady and deliberate. My mother saw me first. She was mid-laugh when her eyes locked onto mine. Her smile froze instantly. The color drained from her face so fast she looked ill. She looked like she had just seen a ghost walk right out of a grave. She quickly excused herself from the group of donors and marched toward me, her heels clicking aggressively on the polished stone floor. My father and Elijah noticed the shift in her demeanor and quickly followed her, forming a defensive wall in front of me. She stopped exactly 2 feet from me. Her jaw was tight, and a visible vein pulsed on the side of her neck. "What the hell are you doing here?" she hissed, keeping her voice low so the surrounding guests wouldn't hear. "Hello, Mom," I said smoothly. I did not break eye contact. "You look lovely tonight." "I told you never to contact us again," she whispered fiercely, her eyes darting around. "Get out, now, before I call security and have you dragged out." "You did," I agreed calmly. "But then you sent out an invitation to half the city claiming I abandoned you and grandmother. I just thought I should show up and correct the record in person. Especially since you are currently pledging $50,000 to this charity. Money that, as of yesterday, completely does not exist." My father stepped forward, his face flushed an angry red. "Joshua, stop it right now. This is not the time or the place for a family dispute. You are embarrassing us." "Embarrassing you?" I raised an eyebrow, my voice steady. "You embarrassed yourselves when you let Elijah drain Grandma's medical fund to rent a sports car." Elijah's head snapped back. He looked around wildly to see if anyone heard. "Shut up, man," he muttered, stepping closer to me. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I am talking about," I said, my voice rising just enough to cut cleanly through the ambient noise of the room. Heads began to turn. Conversations nearby stopped abruptly. "I know that the townhouse deal fell through yesterday because I pulled my financial verification. I know that Oakwood Estates canceled Grandma's reservation because you have absolutely no money to pay for it." "Keep your voice down," my mother snapped, her eyes wide with genuine, unadulterated panic. But it was too late. The commotion had attracted the wrong kind of attention. David, the chairman of the charity's board of directors, a man with deep pockets, massive influence, and zero tolerance for fraud, stepped out of the crowd. He was a tall, imposing man in his late 60s. "Is there a problem here, Patricia?" David asked, his sharp eyes flicking between me and my mother. My mother instantly plastered on a fake, trembling smile. "David, no problem at all. This is just my son, Joshua. He is going through a very difficult time emotionally. We were just asking him to leave so he doesn't cause a scene." She was so incredibly good at it. Without missing a beat, she played the victim perfectly. But I was ready. I popped the brass clasps on my briefcase. "Actually, David," I said, pulling out the thick stack of papers. My emotional state is completely fine. My financial state is even better, considering I just untangled myself from a massive, coordinated fraud. Fraud! David's eyebrows shot up. My mother lunged forward to grab the papers from my hand, but I stepped back smoothly out of her reach. Patricia has been leveraging a bridge loan secured by my assets to pledge donations tonight, I told David, handing him the top document. She failed to mention that I legally revoked all authorizations 48 hours ago, after she left me a voicemail officially cutting me out of the family. The townhouse sale is dead. They have zero liquidity. In fact, her youngest son just drained their emergency medical reserves to rent a Porsche. The silence in the conservatory was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop on the stone floor. David looked down at the document. It was the official notification from the title company confirming the cancellation of the escrow account. He looked up, his expression hardening into absolute disgust. "Patricia," David said, his voice carrying clearly across the quiet room. "Were you planning on using this charity to launder a fake social status, while your own mother is losing her care facility?" My mother opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at my father for help, but he was staring at the floor, completely defeated. Elijah looked like he wanted to run away and hide. "This is a private family matter," my mother finally choked out, tears welling in her eyes. "Not when you put it on our official letterhead, it isn't," David said coldly. "I think it is best if your family leaves immediately, and do not expect to remain on the committee." I stood there and watched the fake empire burn. I watched my mother's precious social standing turn to absolute ash in front of the most important people in her life. This is a moment that changed everything, when I finally regained control of my life. Thank you for your patience in getting this far. You are amazing. Please help me like the video and leave a comment with the number 1 below so I know you've been with me this far. This will not only help more people find this story, but also let me know that my experiences are meaningful to someone. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to continue sharing the rest of this journey. I snapped my briefcase shut. I did not say another word to my parents. I turned around and walked out of the conservatory. As I hit the cool night air outside, I took a deep, cleansing breath. For the first time in my life, I felt completely, utterly free. The fallout from the gala was absolute, brutal, and incredibly swift. I did not hear from my family for 3 entire days. I imagine they were too busy putting out the massive fires I had publicly exposed to bother screaming at me. But a week later, I received a text from my father. "We are at the old house, packing. We need to talk to you. Please, Joshua, just 1 hour." I almost did not go. I had no legal or moral obligation to them anymore. But a small part of me needed to see it. I needed to see the grim reality of their consequences to fully close the door and move on with my life. I drove to my childhood home on a dreary Saturday afternoon. The lawn was overgrown. There was a rented moving truck parked in the driveway, but no one was actively loading it. I walked through the front door without knocking. The house was half-packed, a chaotic, depressing mess of cardboard boxes, bubble wrap, and bare walls. It looked exactly like their lives. Disorganized, hollow, and falling apart. My parents and Elijah were sitting around the kitchen table. They looked utterly exhausted. My father looked like he had aged 10 years in a week. My mother had dark circles under her eyes, stripped of all her usual makeup and overwhelming arrogance. I stood in the doorway. I did not sit down. "You have exactly 1 hour," I said. My father cleared his throat nervously. "Joshua, things have gotten very bad. The townhouse deal is completely dead. The buyers for this house found out we are desperate, and they demanded a massive repair credit, effectively lowering their offer by $50,000. We are completely underwater." "And the charity?" I asked, my voice devoid of sympathy. My mother flinched as if I had struck her. "David formally forced me to resign," she whispered. "I cannot show my face at the club. Everyone knows." "Good," I said flatly. "Actions have consequences." Elijah slammed his hand on the table, breaking his silence. You ruined everything. You embarrassed us in front of everyone. If you had just signed the damn papers like you were supposed to, none of this would have happened. I looked at my younger brother, feeling nothing but disdain. If I had signed the papers, I would be legally responsible for the massive debt you created renting a Porsche to impress a girl who probably already dumped you. Elijah's face went bright red. He looked away, confirming my suspicion. That is actually why we asked you here, my mother said, her voice shaking slightly. She looked up at me, and I saw the old, manipulative gleam return to her eyes for just a fleeting second. We talked to Carter, the lawyer. There is a way to fix this, to save the house and keep us out of court. I am not signing anything, I warned her immediately. You don't have to sign a new loan. My father jumped in, speaking quickly. We know you were planning to buy that condo downtown next month. You have the down payment sitting in cash. I stared at them. I could not believe what I was hearing. Are you completely out of your minds? Joshua, please listen to reason. My mother pleaded, standing up and reaching toward me. If you cancel the purchase of your condo, you can use that cash to pay off Elijah's debt and cover the gap for the townhouse. We can put your name on the deed. It will be an investment. We are family. We have to stick together. Your father's stress is so bad. He was muttering about a divorce last night. Do you want to destroy this family? There it was. The ultimate sickening twist. Even after everything, even after the public humiliation, even after the complete destruction of their lives, they still expected me to sacrifice my own life to save them. They wanted me to cancel my own home, my sanctuary, to pay for Elijah's luxury car rental. They were literally trying to hold their marriage hostage to guilt-trip me into submission. I looked at my mother. I looked at my father. I looked at the golden child. I did not feel angry anymore. I just felt profound, overwhelming pity. You really don't get it, do you? I said softly. Get what? My dad asked, confused. I am not a person to you, I said. I never was. I am an insurance policy. I am a bank account. I am the guy who cleans up the mess. You didn't invite me here to apologize. You invited me here to ask for my money. That is not true, my mother cried. Yes, it is, I said, my voice hardening into steel. You told me to never contact you again, and I am finally going to grant your wish. Joshua, you cannot do this, my father yelled, standing up, his face red again. What about your grandmother? If we lose the house, where will she go? That was the final manipulation, using an innocent, sick old woman to trap me. I already took care of it, I said. They froze. What? My mother asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. I met with a state social worker 3 days ago, I explained, watching their faces crumble. I provided undeniable proof of your financial insolvency. I secured an emergency medical conservatorship over Grandma. She was moved this morning to a clean, safe, state-funded facility. It doesn't have a private chef or an indoor hydrotherapy pool, but she is safe, and more importantly, her care is legally separated from your impending bankruptcy. My mother let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. You stole my mother. I saved her from you, I corrected coldly. I turned around and walked toward the front door. Joshua, my father yelled, his voice echoing in the empty hallway. If you walk out that door, you are dead to us. We will call the lawyer. Do you hear me? I stopped with my hand on the doorknob. I looked over my shoulder one last time at the pathetic wreckage of my family. You guys died to me the exact second I heard that voicemail, I said. Enjoy moving forward. Psych. I opened the door, walked out into the bright sunlight, and closed it firmly behind me. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror once. 3 months passed. 90 days of absolute, uninterrupted silence. If you have ever been the emotional and financial shock absorber for a highly toxic family, you know exactly what that first month of no contact actually feels like. It does not feel like an immediate victory. It feels terrifying. It feels like you are walking on a frozen lake, constantly waiting for the ice to crack beneath your boots. For the first few weeks, I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. Every single time my phone buzzed with an unknown number, my heart rate would instantly spike. I expected it to be their aggressive real estate lawyer threatening me with a frivolous lawsuit. I expected it to be some new, aggressive debt collector trying to track down Elijah because he used my social security number as a reference. I kept waiting for the screaming, the tearful guilt trips, the inevitable manufactured emergency that only I could supposedly fix. But my phone never rang with their drama. The emergency never arrived at my doorstep. Because for the first time in my entire adult life, my door was firmly, legally, and permanently locked to them. I did not have to actively seek out information about what happened to the empire of lies they tried to build. In a city like ours, when a prominent family whose entire existence relies on fake social prestige publicly collapses, the gossip travels faster than a wildfire in dry brush. I heard the grim details through the grapevine, mostly through late-night texts and awkward diner breakfasts with my Uncle Luke. Luke had suddenly found himself as the brand-new, reluctant target of my parents' endless, bitter complaints, and he desperately needed someone to vent to. The luxury lakefront townhouse deal did not just fall through. It exploded in a spectacular legal mess. The sellers were absolutely furious that their time had been wasted and their own moving timeline was severely delayed. They refused to sign a mutual release. They kept the massive earnest money deposit my parents had scraped together. Carter, the high-priced lawyer who had aggressively texted me that night demanding I fix everything, officially dropped my parents as clients the exact moment my father's retainer check bounced. Lawyers do not work for exposure, and they certainly do not work for people who lie about their liquidity. The buyers for our old childhood home, the one my parents were desperately trying to sell to cover their tracks, pulled out entirely. During a routine follow-up inspection, the buyers discovered deep structural issues and extensive water damage in the foundation that my father had been completely ignoring for a decade. My parents were forced to list the house again, this time with full disclosures, at a massive fraction of the original asking price. They were completely underwater on the mortgage. Uncle Luke told me that the stress was so thick in that half-packed, miserable house that my parents were screaming the word divorce at each other every single night. My mother bitterly blamed my father's string of failed business ventures for putting them in this position. My father angrily blamed my mother's relentless obsession with looking wealthy in front of people who did not actually care about her. Naturally, neither of them blamed themselves for the greed and entitlement that brought them down. But the absolute hardest hit landed exactly where it was supposed to, on my mother's fragile, carefully curated social standing. David, the chairman of the elder care charity, did not just force her to quietly resign from the board. He made sure every prominent member of their country club knew exactly why she left. She went from being the wealthy, philanthropic socialite hosting extravagant galas to a complete social pariah in the span of a single week. The wealthy women she had spent 20 years desperately trying to impress suddenly stopped returning her calls. Her lunch invitations were politely declined or entirely ignored. She was completely exiled from the only world that mattered to her. She lost the only currency she truly valued, other people's envy. And then there was Elijah, my golden child brother, the aspiring entrepreneur who honestly thought he could treat our grandmother's emergency medical fund like his own personal inheritance. Without my stable salary and my pristine credit history to act as his invisible safety net, the harsh reality of the real world hit him like a concrete wall. The luxury car rental agency quickly realized the joint account he was drawing his monthly payments from was completely empty. 3 weeks after the charity gala, a repo team showed up at his expensive, gated apartment complex. They did not care about his velvet dinner jackets or his curated Instagram aesthetic. They hooked up that rented Porsche 911 right out of his reserved parking spot in broad daylight and drove off. His new girlfriend, the one he had proudly dragged down to a beachfront resort in Miami using stolen money, packed her designer bags and left him the very next morning. Elijah was evicted a month later after failing to pay rent twice in a row. He had to pack his remaining clothes in garbage bags and move back into the crumbling, unsold childhood home with my miserable parents. The three of them were now trapped in a cramped, tense prison of their own making, staring at each other, with no one left to blame but themselves. My father, a man who had spent his entire adult life projecting the image of a successful businessman and sneering at blue-collar work, finally had to swallow his massive pride. To stop the crushing weight of the collection notices and to keep the electricity from being shut off, he took a job as a floor manager at a local big-box hardware supply chain. I actually drove past the store once on my way to a client meeting and saw him standing in the loading dock. He was wearing a bright orange company vest, arguing with a delivery driver, looking older and more utterly defeated than I had ever seen him. A part of me, the old, deeply conditioned Joshua who was trained to fix their pain, felt a brief, sharp pang of guilt in my chest. But I quickly reminded myself of the truth. I reminded myself that I had spent years working 3 terrible, exhausting jobs just to put myself through college because he quietly stole my college fund to cover his own mistakes. He was not a victim of circumstance. He was finally, for the first time in his life, experiencing the natural consequences of his own actions. While their fake empire burned to the ground, I was quietly, methodically rebuilding my real world. I did not abandon my grandmother. I never would. She was the only true, innocent victim in their chaotic circus of lies. But I absolutely refused to let my parents use her well-being as a pawn to emotionally blackmail me or control my finances ever again. I took action on my own terms. Through the state social worker I had confidentially contacted prior to the final confrontation, I initiated a permanent medical custody arrangement. It was a brutal, exhausting legal process that required stacks of documentation, sworn affidavits, and multiple court appearances. But providing the judge with undeniable, documented proof of my parents' extreme financial negligence, specifically Elijah draining her emergency account while my parents looked the other way, made the ruling undeniable. The court stripped my parents of their control, and I was granted full legal conservatorship over her care and well-being. She was living in a state-funded facility now. It was modest. It did not have a private chef, marble countertops in the bathrooms, or a luxurious indoor hydrotherapy pool like the Oakwood Estates facility my mother had constantly bragged about to her friends. But it was spotlessly clean. The nurses and orderlies were incredibly kind, patient, and deeply attentive to the residents. The facility had a beautiful, quiet little garden courtyard where the residents could sit safely in the afternoon sun. Every single Sunday morning, without fail, I drove out to the suburbs to visit her. I would bring her favorite tin of Danish butter cookies and sit with her on a green bench in the garden. Her dementia made her forget a lot of things. Sometimes she thought I was my father when he was younger. Sometimes she didn't know my name at all. But she always smiled warmly when I held her fragile hand. I used a significant portion of my recent promotion salary to quietly upgrade her living situation. I paid to have her moved to a private room with a better view of the garden. I hired a private physical therapist to come in 3 times a week to keep her mobility strong. I did all of this directly through the facility's billing department, ensuring my name and my accounts were firmly firewalled. My parents had absolutely no access to the accounts, no say in her medical treatment, and zero ability to use her care as a prop for their social standing. In fact, due to the conservatorship ruling, they were only legally allowed to visit her during strictly supervised hours. Unsurprisingly, they rarely made the trip. The facility wasn't glamorous enough for my mother to take pictures in, and there was no audience there for her to perform her role as the devoted, suffering daughter. Sitting there on that garden bench with my grandmother, watching her laugh at a small bluebird landing on the wooden fence, I realized something incredibly profound. Taking care of your family is not about writing blank checks to cover up their toxic, destructive behavior. It is not about protecting them from the consequences of their own greed. True care is about protecting the truly vulnerable from those who would exploit them. I had finally learned the difference, and that knowledge brought me a peace I had never known. Late in the fall, the air in the city finally turned crisp and aggressively cold. I stood alone in the exact center of a spacious, entirely empty living room on the 12th floor of a high-rise building downtown. Massive floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning, unobstructed panoramic view of the city skyline. The sky was a sharp, clear blue, and the distant buildings glittered in the afternoon sun. I held a single heavy brass key in the palm of my right hand. I had just officially closed on my condo. This was the exact same condo my parents had fiercely demanded I cancel so I could take my cash down payment and bail them out of their self-inflicted bankruptcy. I walked slowly through the quiet rooms. The sharp smell of fresh paint and newly polished hardwood floors filled the air. My footsteps echoed off the bare walls. I signed the massive, intimidating stack of closing documents at the title company entirely alone that morning. There was no family group chat buzzing with excited congratulations or heart emojis. There was no mother demanding to come over immediately to measure the guest room for curtains she preferred. There was no father casually asking to borrow my spare secure parking space for his golf buddies. There was no brother texting me to ask if he could crash on my new leather couch for a few weeks while he got back on his feet. It was just me, a clean blue pen, a perfectly clean legal title, and a profound, heavy silence. Some people might think that kind of silence sounds deeply lonely. They might think that standing in an empty apartment without a family to call is a tragedy. But to me, listening to the quiet hum of the city through the thick glass, it sounded like an earned victory. It sounded like absolute, untouchable peace. People often think that revenge has to be incredibly cinematic. We are trained by movies to think it requires screaming matches in the pouring rain, spectacular public ruin, physical fights, or delivering one perfect, devastating one-liner under the crystal chandeliers of a high society charity gala. And I will admit, exposing the fraud at the conservatory in front of David and the board felt incredibly satisfying in that specific heated moment. It was a release of decades of pressure. But true revenge? The kind of revenge that actually heals your soul and lets you sleep 8 hours a night? It does not look like a movie scene. It looks like boring, meticulous documentation. It looks like drawing firm, uncompromising boundaries and enforcing them without guilt. It looks like the absolute refusal to keep your enemies warm just because they happen to share your last name or your DNA. Sometimes, the deepest, most devastating revenge you can enact on toxic people is simply stepping aside. It is stepping out of the line of fire and letting them experience the full, crushing weight of a life they built entirely on top of your unpaid loyalty and your unappreciated labor. My parents and my brother spent years treating me like an emotionless ATM. They treated me like a guaranteed insurance policy, a human shield against the harsh realities of the real world. They aggressively demanded my respect, my money, and my time without ever offering an ounce of genuine care in return. They mourned the loss of my wallet, but they never once mourned the loss of their son. In a way, cutting contact felt like attending a funeral. Not a literal funeral with a casket and flowers, but the emotional mourning of the family I always wanted but never actually had. I had to bury the hope that my mother would ever look at me with genuine pride instead of calculation. I had to bury the hope that my father would step up and protect me. I had to grieve the illusion of my family so I could finally embrace the reality of my own life. When my mother told me to never contact them again in that voicemail, she truly thought she was punishing me. She thought I would shatter into a million pieces. She thought the threat of isolation would force me to beg for my place back in the hierarchy, right beneath Elijah. Instead, I gave them exactly what they asked for. I moved forward. I let them live in the exact world they created, completely devoid of my help, my salary, and my solutions. I walked over to the massive window of my new condo and pressed my hand flat against the cool glass, looking down at the bustling, tiny cars moving through the city below. I took a deep, slow breath. My chest did not feel tight anymore. The chronic, heavy fatigue that had haunted my bones for over a decade was completely gone. I was 34 years old, and for the very first time since I was a teenager handing over my diner paychecks, my life belonged entirely to me. If you are watching this video right now, and you recognize yourself in this story, if you are the person in your family who always fixes the messes, who always sacrifices your own peace to maintain the toxic peace of others, who quietly absorbs the financial hits to keep the boat from rocking, hear me now. You do not owe anyone your own destruction just because you share blood. This story is not just a dramatic, entertaining tale about a ruined real estate deal or a canceled high society charity gala. It is a harsh, incredibly realistic look at the mechanics of financial and emotional abuse within family dynamics. We are often taught that abuse must be physical or explicitly verbally violent to be real. But abuse does not always look like screaming. Sometimes, it looks like a parent quietly stealing a teenager's college fund to cover a business loss and manipulating them into calling it a family sacrifice. It looks like a sibling weaponizing tears and guilt to drain your hard-earned savings while refusing to work. It looks like being implicitly told, over and over again, that your usefulness to the family is the only acceptable price for your belonging. The absolute greatest lesson I learned on this painful journey, and the one I desperately hope you take away from my experience today, is that setting a firm boundary is never an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate act of deep, necessary self-respect. You cannot rebuild a healthy, functioning family structure on top of a massive sinkhole of lies, entitlement, and financial manipulation, no matter how much love you pour into it. True love and genuine family loyalty require mutual accountability. When people consistently show you through their actions that they value your wallet, your credit score, and your ability to fix their problems far more than they value your actual well-being, you must believe them the first time. Walking away from a toxic family system is not abandoning your family. It is the vital act of rescuing yourself from drowning with them. You are allowed to protect your peace, your future, and your resources. I would love to know what your favorite takeaway from my journey is. Have you ever had to draw a hard, uncomfortable line with a family member who was taking advantage of you? Let me know your thoughts and your own stories in the comments below. Or, if this story simply resonated with you, if it gave you the courage you needed today, and you support the boundaries I finally set, just leave a comment saying good. It lets me know that sharing my truth actually matters, and that none of us are truly alone in this fight. Thank you for walking this path with me today.